Welcome. I'm Pastor Vince Marola of Bethany Lutheran Church in Woodhull, Illinois. I'm glad you joined us for 5 minutes with the Gospel of Mark. My intent with this is in the next couple of weeks or months to go through the entire Gospel of Mark, 5 minutes at a time. It'll be reading verses and my reflections on the verses, and it's going to take no more than 5 minutes. I'm going to start my timer on my phone so that we don't exceed that time. And we're going to cover the book. I'll make sure that we've got verses out there and things like that as we go. As to when you're going to see it, it just depends on the time that I have to do this. So sit back and welcome to the beginning of 5 minutes with Mark. When we talk about the Gospel of Mark, it's important to talk about all four Gospels together: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now, John is a very different gospel than Matthew, Mark, and Luke. In fact, John has a statement toward the end of the gospel in chapter 20, where he says the purpose of the gospel. Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing in him, you may have life in his name. The Gospel of John was written basically so that as people read it, they understood who Jesus was, how he was in relationship with God, and that in doing that, the idea was that they would come to know Jesus and come to believe, and in believing have life in his name. Now, Matthew, Mark, and Luke are a very different breed of Gospels. They're called the Synoptic Gospels, Synoptic. And that's because they're very similar in character. You can actually line them up side by side in places. You can find stories that are in all three of them. You can find them that are in two. You can find different variations of the stories. And the stories in these Gospels that are told in more than one place really go back to the purpose of the books and the reason why the books were written. Now, we believe, and I say the word believe because we don't have a copy of the Gospel of Mark written in Mark's hands laying around anywhere. We know that the book was written in Greek. We know that it was written probably approximately about 60 AD. We've got pieces of manuscripts from that time and a little later, but we just don't have the gospel written in Mark's hand. So again, we believe it's the oldest of the gospels in the synoptic tradition, followed by Matthew, followed by Luke. But again, we don't have the book written in their hands. And that's why it's so important when we talk, first of all, about the Gospels, to talk about this is what we believe about when they were written. Biblical scholars are doing a guess, their best guess based on what they're seeing in the texts. And as you read through the New Testament, especially in the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible, which we'll be using, you'll see footnotes. And these footnotes come along. And they're a part of the tradition of Bible study, a part of the tradition of Greek. Because as you can imagine, before the printing press, when the Bible was copied from scribe to scribe as they laid one copy out and went to another copy, if you got a letter wrong or something a little bit off, you might find different words. And since this was written in a language, Greek, Koine Greek, that doesn't exist anymore, we're doing our best when we translate to guess at what the words really mean. So it's really an interesting study, and sometime if you want to talk a whole lot more about it, we'll do that. But again, as we look at these, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, we're going to look at the purpose for these books so that we can better see what the purpose of Mark's gospel was. Now, the Gospel of Matthew, when it starts out, it opens up with the genealogy of Jesus. It ties Jesus back to Abraham. And it's very important because based on that and based on the stories in the Gospel of Matthew, Most biblical scholars agree that this was a gospel that was written for Jewish people and Jewish converts in and around Jerusalem. And it tied Jesus's Jewish identity to Jesus as the Christ. It did this so that it could help Jews to understand how Jesus fit into the Jewish story. The Gospel of Luke starts out and talks about it's an undertaking of the story of Jesus, the Christ. And what it really is and what it really tells us is it's a book written for the Gentiles, for the non-Jews who've converted to Christianity, to understand who this Jesus is. And then there's Mark. And then there's the timer. So you're going to have to come back another night to hear a little bit more and hear about the beginning of the Gospel of Mark. This has been 5 Minutes with Mark. Thank you very much.